studied French and German, and taught in a secondary school. At only 20, she was probably the youngest teacher in the whole of Scotland, we think. She's been writer in residence at Glasgow Women's Library, at the Gallery of Modern Art, also in Glasgow, West Lothian College, and at Aberdeenshire Arts, and also at Paisley University. She is the founder of and tutors at Wild Women Writing Workshops, and her powerful 2001 Wild Women of a Certain Age has been republished by Luath Press and is available on Kindle as well as in print, and includes the first poem she ever wrote, Tupperware Torture. It includes a line, "It isn't easy to think straight face to face with a plastic plate," and it made me laugh. Now she's edited Unbridled, an anthology of poems from women aged from 14 to 70 plus, on themes of witness, protest, and dissent. Please put your Zoom screen on speaker view for the best view of the discussion, and please also mute yourself and get ready to hear from poet, tutor, and Stirling's first Macca in 500 years, Magi Gibson. Good evening, Maggie.
Good evening, Alison. Thank you very much for that lovely introduction.
Tell me, how did this anthology come about?
Well, I was aware in the last few years, particularly once the Let Women Speak event started up, but there were other public events too, that women were writing poems about how they felt, essentially about being a woman, and in the climate that we're in today, where women's rights are certainly have been up for discussion, even when women didn't always have a voice in that. So I've been writing poetry since 1985. So I was very, very struck that so many women who wouldn't have seen themselves as poets too were taking to poetry to express these strong, strong feelings. And I've always been very strong myself in the fact that poetry is for everyone, and we need our more academic type poets. They contribute to the culture, but poetry is really for the people as well, for all people. And this was proving what I had always believed too, that poetry could be used as a political force to express yourself and hopefully to achieve change and let others hear a viewpoint in a slightly different way, just coming at it in that slightly different way. So as I was aware of that going on, and then people would, either videos would be put on social media, or sometimes people would post a poem, I was thinking how fabulous that was. And I got the opportunity to speak at Forth Valley Feminist Conference last February in Alloa. And I asked if I could speak on women's poetry of protest, witness, protest, and dissent, because I've always been a political poet myself, as well as being a lyrical poet, and as well as writing other types of poems. And I really felt that women should know. I wanted to talk about the validity of this, because some of the best poets that have inspired me were the Black American women poets. So we go back to Audre Lorde and Maya Angelou, and many others, June Jordan being another one. And here we were in the UK with women coming at this strongly in the same way, and feeling and passion, feeling so passionate. So I thought to myself, well, maybe if I found a way to do a call out for poems to contact these women, perhaps I could get the best, the most powerful of the poems together and create a small book. And I was thinking at first of even bringing out this little book of my own 16 poems. If I see the size of the book that came out, you'll see there's quite a difference there. And I was thinking, even if we just brought out something like this, and it's there as a document, and this is what is so important to me, because throughout for centuries and millennia, women's writing has been lost. They like to say that years ago it didn't exist, and that's why we weren't there. That's why we weren't present as women writers, apart from one or two who really excelled and made their names. But the truth is, we're always there. We got written out of the canon. It's happened in my lifetime. I've watched it happen. Just as we were making ground in the late 1980s and into the 1990s in Scotland, we've lost quite a bit of that ground as well, of getting women onto main platforms and women poets being fully represented within literary magazines and collections that were coming out. So essentially, because I was speaking at the conference, I thought, well, I can't speak if I don't say that I'm going to do something. At the same time, I had not a clue how I was going to make this happen. I didn't want women sending me poems and then it turning out that they, had their poems and I couldn't do anything. But because I stood on stage at the women's conference and I saw the effect that my talk there, my speech, had on these women and what the women were saying to me afterwards, I thought, you just have to do it. Take one step at a time. I have self-published. Most of my books are all my books are published by publishers, and I've been in more anthologies than I can count. But I had self-published this little 16 poems. It's for one poem for each day of the activism against violence against women and girls. And I thought to myself, just start out in it, see how it goes. I had hoped that someone kind would pop up and say, oh, we have a benefactor, we have a philanthropist here who would love to put up the money for your book. I wasn't looking to be paid myself, and it would have been lovely to have been able to pay the contributors. But the important thing isn't about the money, it's about this book existing. It's a marker in time for where we're at right now in 2003. So that's what I really wanted to do. And I thought, get the poems in, do the editing, start to look at what might be possible. If it's quite a slim volume, I might be able to just put the money up myself and do it that way. But when I got the poems in, there were so many, and I'm sorry, I couldn't publish everyone, but part of the point of an anthology is it's a selection. It's not, you don't publish everything that comes into you. And so there were cases where I thought, I like this poem a lot. It's not quite perfect, maybe. I like it a lot, but I maybe had 4 others, and maybe one of them on that same theme was perfect. So I had to say no to some people. And the number of poems, I did a call out first. I do believe in being very democratic and fair. So I did call out, and obviously at the conference, although I didn't give a contact or anything, but then I was putting it on social media within groups where I knew there might be people interested, and where I knew that the project wouldn't be killed with a stake through its heart before it got any further. Because that was obviously, I'm a cancelled poet and have been I think I got accidentally cancelled, or I accidentally cancelled myself in 2016, International Women's Day. So I've been through the mill in Scotland myself with things getting derailed. And even just this year, there was an attempt to derail the first event that I put on post-pandemic. And I might talk about that later. But to come back to the book, as more and more poems came in, as no philanthropist stepped forward, I thought, right, you just have to do this yourself. I'm from a very can-do kind of family. My mother was absolutely, she was essentially a stay-at-home working class mum. So she made all our clothes, she baked, she knitted I knitted my first cardigan when I was 10. You learn to sew, you learn to do things. So, and mum was brilliant. She had her own toolkit and her own power drill when she was in her 80s. So I just thought, right, you've been through this process as a poet rather than a publisher so often. the editing too. I was already done quite a bit of editing. So you just need to, why do you need funding? Typeset it yourself. I had to learn a new software program to do it and just self-taught in design. Got my head around that. Did all the correspondence, including little conversations with people who didn't get in to the anthology and people who did. It's been pretty full on since May. So I had the call out was that poems had to be in by May 30th, and I wouldn't read any of them till that point. So everybody was on a level playing field. And then I saw there were one or two other poems which had made such an impact on me. There were a few where I actually asked people, could I use them? So the very first poem in the book by Aja the Empress is one such poem. MD in social media will know who Aja the Empress is, I'm sure. Or if you've been to Let Women Speak rally, I think Aja is usually there as a steward and is very striking. And so essentially, I was just doing all these things, bringing it all together, getting more and more excited. I mean, I was just getting so excited about how this book was shaping up. And there are poems from women in Ireland. We have a poem in Irish Gaelic, as well as the translation by the poet herself, by Rialphan Leoinen. I've probably got that right. My husband's actually Irish and I should be able to do that. But he's told me about, I don't know how many times, but it's Rialphan anyway. Delighted to get poems in from her and a few other quite established Irish women poets. There are poems from Scotland, obviously, because that's where I am. I'm sitting in Glasgow at the moment. A lot of poems from England, and there's only the one poem in here from Wales, from Cardiff, and that is by the magnificent Sonia Douglas. And again, if you're on Twitter, you'll have no doubt seen Sonia. She actually did a recording reading the poem from in here, but she couldn't be with us tonight. So it just grew. I just kept working. I found a printer through a friend who runs a literary magazine. It was one that he'd recommended. I had a look at their website. I thought, yep, I can do this. And another of the Irish women poets said to me very kindly, she would put up half the capital if I could put up half. So between us, we put up half. So this is a totally women project. We've kept it that way the whole time. Kept quiet about it because I didn't want the printers getting in contact. There's nothing. I can just say it. There's nothing in this book that I would not totally stand by as an editor, and the editor that I have been for 30 years plus in poetry. But you no doubt are all aware that even when there is nothing, or someone like Julian Phillip just says, I stand with J.K. Rowling, you can get a whole ton of bricks down upon you. That's all it takes. So I had to be I felt, I'm cautious by nature, and I just felt I had to be very careful. I wasn't going to have somebody contacting the printers and saying, oh, you shouldn't be publishing this book. So I kept it very quiet. The printers have been absolutely marvelous, and the reception the book has had, I could not have hoped for more. So I've stopped talking, Alison.
Well, I just think if this is what you can do, you and another poet, to fund it, mm-hmm. and you've produced a magnificent anthology. I have to say, all of the poems in here, I willingly listen to them again and again. Then I wonder how many other anthologies of women's writing might be possible, but don't get beyond first base.
Well, I mean, there's not quite a number of the poems, and this is why I was keen to do it. Quite a number of the poems in this book, I don't think would get published in other anthologies and literary magazines at the moment, because they are saying very definitely, this is what womanhood is. this is my experience of womanhood. And if you read just some of the submission guidelines for most of the poetry magazines and literary magazines at the moment, I mean, it would, I was going to say it would turn your hair blue. I don't know why I said that, why I thought that, but essentially, you just think, what a chilling factor on trying to put, we should be about free speech, we should be about creativity, freedom of expression. I managed for well, let's see, what's it, 1985 I was first published in a women's anthology, interesting enough. 1985 I was first published, and I have managed all these years, and I've worked with the most marginalised communities in Scotland and beyond. I have chosen to do that work because, as you said at the start, I'm actually a fully qualified French and German teacher. But I chose, just after I started writing, I got the opportunity to work with the Workers' Educational Association. It was one of their groups I started at. And I was asked within a year if I would tutor. And at the time, I was like really kind of like, I was a young mum, you know, I was kind of lacking in confidence and didn't put myself out there for things. But I can, looking back, I can see exactly why they thought I would make a good tutor. They were right. And they had to convince me. Oh, I was saying, I can't do that. You know, I'm a French and German teacher. And I absolutely embraced the Workers' Educational Association values. And WEA was ahead of most other groups in including marginalised communities. That was the work I was doing. And I then became probably one of the most experienced creative writing tutors in Scotland, and took over failing groups. And you know, when I was invited in, and the groups thrived in no time at all. And partly because I think it is because I have a very democratic, and that word now, which is so has become so debased, inclusive approach. And I have worked with everyone. I've worked in men's prisons, I've worked in women's prisons, more than one. I took on that work. I was only in my mid-30s at the time, and my then husband was a solicitor, and I was asked if I would do the local men's prison, run a series of workshops. And I said to him, is there any reason he should? And he said, no, you know, he was going into, he wasn't a criminal lawyer fully, but he did a lot of other types of law as well. But he said, no, you know, just treat them like ordinary people, because I had a wee bit of fear. And I just overcame that fear. I just thought, these are my fellow human beings. I'm going in there and I won't ask any of them what they've done. I worked with murderers, I worked with rapists, but I would only find that out later. And I've just been, I have worked with refugees, asylum seekers. I've worked with people with pretty extreme psychiatric issues. I've worked in psychiatric hospital. I have been so inclusive. I've worked with every group. I've worked with toddlers on creative writing. I've done tons of schoolwork. And I've also always been totally inclusive. So there is nothing in this book I would not totally stand by on that basis. Women have a right to their voices. They have a right to their experiences. And if most of our literary magazines and a lot of our writing organisations have become so hidebound with making sure that they don't endanger their funding anywhere, and I think it's short-sighted, I think it's ill-informed, I think it's cowardly. And I also think that in some of the ways they come at this, some of them are betraying quite a deep misogyny. I think the othering of me within the Scottish literary and poetry world, not by everyone, but by enough people who can put fear in other people, is doing the opposite of what they think they're doing. But it also just hides a deep-seated fear of the female. And when you read these poems, maybe they should have a deep-seated fear as a female, because these are powerful, powerful poems in here.
Do you think it's time to have an indication, a demonstration of how powerful some of these poems are, Maggie?
Well, we had the book launch last Saturday afternoon in central Glasgow, and it was brilliant. I did video it, but because I keep having to do everything myself, and the person who'd done a previous event had done the event in May, which got protested against beforehand. It was a man who's wonderful and does these wonderful videos, but he already was booked to do something that afternoon. So I had, but that afternoon was the only afternoon that was suiting everything else. So I had to go ahead with it. But I set up my own video camera, so we do have it on video. But obviously that was, well, there were about, I think, 120 people there, that was the max for the basement cellar in a wonderful bar in central Glasgow, who refused to be bullied in May when I was doing the event with Jenny Lindsay and Elaine Miller, Gus
Grips
Miller, the Fanifisco. They tried to stop us. It was in The Guardian. It was in the got covered by the Times in the run-up to it. It was on TV. It was in the Express, so it's exhausting. It is exhausting. And this time, I don't know if this didn't get wind, but they kept clear. But then again, we did it last year. So we did it in May. We pulled off the event, and they looked like fools, which of course they are. And I mean that. I mean that in the nicest sense. They're foolish because they're protesting against something which doesn't exist.
Yeah, of course.
There is nothing transphobic in this book. There is nothing transphobic in me. And one of the things I see quite often said in social media is that they sometimes wonder if women, feminists like me, have ever met, if we knew a trans person. Of course I know trans people. And I first knowingly met a trans person in it was the late 90s. Some of them weren't born.
Well, you mentioned Jenny Lindsay, and she's in the Zoom tonight with us, and she was a guest of ours last year. Yes. We were very happy to have her and Gillian Phillip, whom we also mentioned. Mm-hmm. And we've got several other of the poets that you've included in. So I'm hoping that some of the people will put some questions in the chat, and maybe make some sort of comment as we go along. But so far, it's just you and me. And I noticed just while you've been talking.
Can I ask a question just before we talk about who? Because I saw there was somebody called Serena in. So if Serena is there, could you tell me, is it Serena Patrick that's in? Who's in the book? I think it's just down as Serena. So maybe Serena herself could indicate.
I don't see a Serena, I'm afraid. Arwen's here. She's already here. And Catherine, Abigail, and Jenny, who I recognise from the
of course.
anthology.
That's fine.
I don't see any of the other poets at the moment, but you never know. People may come in.
Yes.
So you said that you got cancelled in 2016.
Yeah, I was invited. So because of my work with women, which was well known by that point in Scotland, and I had the the collection Wild Women of a Certain Age had come out in 2000. So my career started to go kind of in that direction, because that was what, I think I keep going off piste. That was what got me started doing the Wild Women writing workshops, because the anthology came out, and the following year, 2001, I was asked if I would run a workshop at a conference thing at Stirling University, which was particularly to do with people who'd experienced mental health issues and had used writing as a tool to overcome them. So as part of that, I was asked if I would do something specifically for women, and I came up with the title Wild Women Writing Workshop. And it was it was, first of all, it was oversubscribed. I couldn't get all the women in the room, which was wonderful from my point of view, if a bit scary, but I was an experienced tutor by that point, so it wasn't too bad. And the reaction to the way I was coming at that topic which was very much about the female body. The reaction was overwhelming, actually, at the end of the workshop. And I thought, I should be doing this. So that was essentially how I started to run the workshops for myself. And then I took up much more seriously around about, I think it must have been about 2014 or maybe a wee bit earlier, I started to run them in Glasgow on one evening a week in blocks of 8, the way I do it. And they were always fully subscribed, and it was great to. It was wonderful. What's wonderful in this type of workshop is watching women flourish. I mean, I've taught all male workshops in men's prison. I've taught lots and lots of, or led, whatever word you want to use, tutored lots and lots of workshops. But with these women's workshops, it was so rewarding, because, which is why I'm so passionate about the need for women's single-sex spaces, the need for us to be able to be together at times to talk about not always issues that you would think are only to do with women, but I think the way women come at them can be quite different, and encouraging women to believe in the validity of their voices. This is the thing I've watched. There are quite a number of published and lauded male poets, not male poets, sorry, male writers, including poets, who do acknowledge me, and still do acknowledge me, as being their mentor and having a huge influence on them in the early part of their careers. But the women, the way there's something happens there, the men I've worked with, no matter the level they've been at, I would say almost without exception, there has been a self-belief and a confidence. And that's even with the nervous ones, if you know what I mean. The women that I work with, yes, there will be some who have a lot of self-belief and confidence, but by far the defining thing is I didn't think it was any good. I didn't, it's just something I wrote and I wasn't really thinking of doing anything with it. And there's quite a difference of approach comes in there, which means that women gain an awful lot from being in an all-female group. And one of the things I have to say to women in the all-women group is, I'd like you to stop saying sorry. Sorry, I'll be really quick with this. Sorry, I'll just take a minute. Oh, did I speak for too long there? Sorry. Yes. I've never, and I'm talking about, I first started tutoring in 1985, and I have never once heard a man say that in all shops I've done. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have really good mixed workshops, but what it does mean is that when you have an all-women workshop, it's a much more kind of level playing field. Yes. And women identify that in each other, and we can just say gently, you do know you just did that again there, and they go, all right, it's such an ingrained, it's such a deep habit. Anyway, I'm off the topic of the here.
We've got a question already. I'll just read it out from somebody who needs to stay on mute. Could Maggie say more about what the guidelines are for getting poetry into some publications she alluded to? As a scientist, I now get confronted with a whole section on inclusivity for some publishers. For instance, change all language to gender neutral, such as patient. But the sex is often important, of course, in medicine. So what are the guidelines for getting published?
Well, I mean, they're different for every magazine, every anthology, and because in a way, I don't even bother that much. But sometimes I think, well, that looks really interesting, and then it will say, I mean, some of them will just outright say, or if it's for a performance evening or something, we will not tolerate transphobic poetry. Now, the thing is, I wouldn't call anything I've ever written. I mean, I don't write about this particular topic, but I write about women all the time. And in the anthology, for example, would some people think that's transphobic? And I would have to say, well, actually, no, it's not. And here's the reasons why not. So, but it's one of the things about freedom of speech and freedom of expression in, particularly in a written form, and so in poetry, is that what happens is you get the chilling effect. So you start to self-censor way beyond the level that you should have to, in order to think, oh God, I'd better watch. Maybe they'll think that that's what I'm saying there and it's not. In fact, I mean, a case in point, and this is from a book that came out in 1997. I had a joint poetry collection with my dear and close friend, the writer Helen Lamb, who very sadly passed away suddenly and unexpectedly in 2017. And we were both, kind of earlier in our careers at the point. And Helen said that she had seen a review of that joint collection. It was called Strange Fiction. It's not really available now. That she'd seen a review of it where a male poet had claimed that one of my poems, which is I put it in my full-length collection, Wild Women of a Certain Age, called Bat Song, was anti-men, right? And the last few, so it's the voice of the bats, to give you, and actually there it is here, Night Creatures. Oh, sorry, that's, it's Bat Song. And it starts off, I lived way out in the country at the time, and there were lots of bats in the trees. And I'd found one on the front lawn. And as a poet, you start often with a description. I wanted to take on the voice of the bats, though, because I wished them no ill, but they freaked me slightly. So the poem starts, so our features offend. Too shrunken skulled, too rat-eyed, ugly web-winged embryos, skinny and leather and slinky fur. Do you find our forms too Nazi for your civilized sensibilities? You blame the moon for our presence, but we have always been, are always here. And so the poem goes on for another sort of 12, 15 lines. And the end of the poem says, is it our fault, sir, that you are deaf to the beauty of our songs?
Now, it's a really good poem, that. Yeah, it's excellent.
It's wonderful. The very famous Sorbonne, Scottish Sorbonne professor of geopoetics, Kenneth White, heard me read that poem when I was quite young, and told me that's what you should be doing. That's the one. And the thing is, he obviously hooked onto the sir. Is it our fault, sir, that you are deaf to the beauty of our songs, our song? And I've no idea, really, apart from that, sir, why he thought that was an anti-male poem. I'm not anti-male for a start, but anyway, Helen wouldn't let me read the review. She said it'll only upset you. And in fact, it was quite years later that she told me why. So if we're going to self-censor and think, they'll think this is whatever, right? Transphobic, all the isms under the sun. How can we write? How can we access our real, true creativity? How can we get that freedom? Women have had, no wonder this is called Unbridled, women have had censorship put on us. I mean, very first group I went to was a women's writing group, right? And I was so lucky. The only reason I went was because it had a creche. It's daytime and I had 2 kids under 3 and was childminding one. So anywhere with a creche, I was there. I was right in. And I didn't think we were writing anyway. I thought it was a book group, but it was a turning point for me because it gave me a whole new career. But when I got hooked by the idea of the writing, and that group stopped, I thought I'll go to the local writing group, which was in Stirling, the area I was living. And Stirling Writers Group had been going for a long time, and it was very, very good. And I took along this precious poem, which actually became the title poem of my very first poetry collection, called Kicking Back. And it was about having a scan at about 7 months of pregnancy, and the doctor was treating me very impersonally, as they did in those days, just talked over me to the nurse. Oh, sorry, well, wasn't a scan, it was a checkup. And they asked me if there had been movement in the last, if there had been movement with the baby, and I realised there hadn't been movement for a couple of days, and they were going, oh, it's too small, and all the rest of it. But the doctor wasn't speaking to me directly, so that was essentially what I built the poem around. So I read this quite short poem, be 1 page, of short lines. And the very first comment, the very first bit of feedback I got from this writing group was a man who looked up and went, ugh, why do you women always have to write about childbirth? Childbirth, but it was about pregnancy. And this is my life experience. This is my life experience. And I have every right to write about it. But that was not, I have come through that. That was not unusual in those days. I had some, when I say young female tutor, I mean in my late 30s and into my 40s, I had some terrible things said to me, not about the quality of my, oh no, they always wanted my feedback and wanted the quality of my tutoring. But it was about if I was being too female, too feminine. Well, feminine is not the right word. Too female, I think, would be the word. So, so the advice with the magazines is just keep looking until you find a magazine. Write the way you think it should be written. Stand up for yourself, and then I wouldn't want published in these magazines that have these kind of things. And maybe we need to start up our new magazine.
Yeah, we do. We need a new magazine. Jenny had a comment. Jenny, I don't know if you want to make your point about submissions.
Was I not replying to somebody? I was saying about you sort of look at opportunities and things like that in the arts, and the criteria will sound like Maggie says, there'll be all these sort of different opportunities, and you go, oh, well, that sounds good, I could apply for that. But then you'll see the small print at the bottom that's like, we are particularly looking for submissions from LGBTQIA plus people. So, and then you look at who the judges are, and there are people who've hounded people online. So you end up just sort of feeling like, oh, what's the bloody point?
Yes. Sorry, you were going to say?
Just to say, which is why, though, we have to just do things for ourselves, which Jenny and I, of course, have both been doing of late a fair bit. And we just need to start being, I mean, I think the thing about Unbridled is that it is subversive because it's going against what we're being told we should be doing. It's saying, no, we will do it for ourselves. We want to write about womanhood and about some of the things that have happened in recent years and how we feel about that, and about the word that launched that kept coming up was rage. We want to express that in our own way, and we're not going, we know you will not be interested in what we're writing. They're just not tuned that way. And that wouldn't be a problem if a lot of these places weren't getting public funding as well. And they have to be much aware that the public is much larger, and you do not have to be a minority group to be suffering oppression and being sidelined. And I think that's another notion, another thing that should really be kept in mind by our arts councils and all the other organisations who have the power to just shift things slightly. I'm not saying I don't want a big pendulum swing. I don't want a pendulum swing at all. I just want a reasonable position in the middle of the road.
Yeah. But we've got a question now from Terry. Terry's put something in the chat, which I think I'd like her to ask you. Terry, would you care to
Sure, yeah. I've put, as a poet writer, how can you be true to yourself and your poetry if your language is restricted? Surely this prevents the flow of thought, language, and meaning. And just something else that dropped into my head. It's a bit like trying to write a symphony without all the notes. You can't make it flow. The language is so important, and the perfect word comes to you. But if you can't find the perfect word because you're not allowed to use that, or just it's not a gender issue word. You just need the flow. And if you have to be thinking about the language you are not allowed to use, it prevents you from writing.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously, I totally agree with that. But at the same time, I'm also aware that there are words that we have within the English language, and they're becoming more historic words now, which we certainly should not be using now, but neither should we be banning the books from years ago where they were. So I think we do have a way that we actually filter, but so it's not even about individual words. I think it's about the concepts and ideas, and having that creative, because as a poet, you're going to go back and you're going to say, oh no, that's bringing the wrong baggage in with it, that word, so I'm going to change it. But it's more about, if you think, well, I'm supposed to have becoming at this political angle, or they'll not be interested, which is back more to what Jenny was saying. But for all these things, I think the chilling factor is complex. And that's why it's hard to, over the years, it's been hard to explain to people why you feel it's a problem. And it's as though the whole thing is like an octopus. You get one leg under control and whoops, another one flies out. It's like trying to capture that. So I think all of these things are very, very complex. And but if we don't start from deep within yourself, and if someone is telling you that deep within yourself and that experience might upset, well, and here's another example of it. When I say I got into trouble years ago, I got into trouble, first of all, at the March 2016 International Women's Day. I was asked they were Scottish Pen and Edinburgh University were kicking off a year called the Year of Dangerous Women. So they asked me, that's a few other writers too, but I was the final one on, and so it was a kind of a keynote speech. And because it's what I do in my workshops, I was talking about the importance of women writing from the body in the first instance. Obviously, everything you write isn't from here, but if you can't take, if you're not, women have over the years been, and years ago, were very bridled in what they were allowed to talk about. So you've whispered about things years ago, like, periods or anything like that, or you had a couple of trusted friends you might talk about. And to give it even slightly more historical thing, my mother wouldn't even say the word pregnant. She thought it was a rude word, So I'm coming from this background in Presbyterian Scotland. So expecting was the polite word, or what's the other one? Oh, if when a woman had a baby, this is from my childhood. If when a woman had a baby, they never said, has she given birth? They would say, is she better now? Right?
As if you've been ill, right?
So there was all this talking around language. And that even although my daughters, who are now women, won't have that, there's still a bit of this coming down to us. So one of the things I like to do in my workshops is, in the first couple of workshops, is to just get people to write about the bit of their body they're most uncomfortable with. And I mean, some people will choose toes, but other people will get right in there and about their hang-ups about breasts or vulva or whatever. And it is so liberating for everyone in the group when someone does that, because suddenly it's all right, we can talk about this, we can become more informed, and we can have a laugh, and we can write some beautiful poems as well. So essentially, I think it's about, we need to reclaim our language. But I was in the Scottish at this Facebook group, a really big Facebook group. And I think I was actually the first person to sign up to it because I just happened to be online and saw it at the time and thought that's for me. So it was called Scottish Women in the Arts. I think I've got that right. And I thought, oh, this is a great idea. And it was a great idea. And then after not that long a time, I think it was a few months, someone put on, because you could put on art from other places, and it was from a New York artist, I think, put on vulva art. And it was absolutely beautiful. It was done with moss and flowers and things. It was gorgeous. Mm. And someone objected and said, I think, I don't think we should have this because, no, so this wasn't a trans woman that was complaining. It was people complaining, and this is so often what happens about saying it's not fair on our trans sisters who are in this group. And I thought, no, because it's so central to what I've been doing for a few decades now. I thought, no, that can't be. So I explained what happened to people like Sharon Olds, who is a poet, American poet, that is well worth any woman having a read of her various collections. I would recommend any of them. But one of the things that she did was specifically write about the female body in the most alive and visceral way that you could come at that, and about sex. And when she was first writing, that wasn't, quite what she was writing, but she was told that her poetry would be better suited to a women's magazine. And that she'd go there. We've been getting told what we can't do for so long. And here I was, and I put on her poem, I think it was her poem about a vagina, into this group and said, we must be able to do this. It's a women's group. We must be able to, if not here, then where? And I had some to and fro, and it settled down. And then a short time later, a photographer put on a beautiful photo for International Women's Day, again, of part of a woman's body. And again, it was, so they should have just called themselves No Vaginas, please. Honestly. And I just thought, and there was this huge, became known as Vagina Gate 1 and Vagina Gate 2. And I just thought, this is how am I supposed to be encouraging women that yes, we can explore it and we can write about anything, and that is publishable in literary magazines and other places. And at the same time, we're getting told we're getting told, no, you can't. And I see Jenny has named the photographer. Yeah, I knew who that was. It was Janica Haney, who was a photographer who put that on, who specializes in photographing naked women in all their natural glory, and sometimes in woods and forests and things. But the thing is, I didn't have to say much. I finished my thing at the International Women's Day launch thing of Dangerous Women, they're kidding themselves. I had finished with my one poem, Vagina, and I realised with hindsight that, oh my goodness, that was it. There was some discussion that came up afterwards, and that was it. I was seen as saying the wrong things. But if talking about women's bodies, writing poetry about women's bodies, and writing about poems about women's reality of living as a woman is going to be deemed transphobic, then that's what has to change, not me.
Yeah,
that's where I come from.
And I think this anthology is a real fight back moment, isn't it? I think it's very very good at saying no, this is not on, and we insist on the right to speak our words about our bodies.
Exactly, and there's a wonderful poem in here from one of the Irish writers, and it's got a different title, and I'm not putting my finger on it, my hand the right way, but it's actually one of the most beautiful poems. There are two actually, both by different Irish poets, and they're two of the most beautiful poems involving vulvas. that I have ever read, and that's it. So we can't if that was happening in that big women in the arts group, and we were being told that, then you can be damn sure it's happening in publishers, it's happening in the literary magazines, the places where we need to place our work, the poetry magazines as well.
Yeah. Another mute, still on mute, a comment from Zoe, who is our chair. A public figure spoke about motherhood on International Women's Day. The next day, they had a message saying they were transphobic for linking being a woman with motherhood. Is it not just words, but whole concepts that to some of the extremists are anathema and shouldn't be spoken about? I think there's room for an anthology called Anathema, don't you?
Yeah, I absolutely. We just need to, but we just need to really reclaim and say, happy to be honest, this is all getting a bit silly. It would be silly if it wasn't affecting people's livelihoods, if it wasn't dangerous. I have no desire at all to upset anyone, whether it's a man who's upset because he thinks my poem is some call to arms or some accusation against all men, or whether it's someone who thinks, oh, but if you read that poem at your thing, then any trans women there. I mean, the thing is, I know trans women who don't have a problem with what I do, but yes, also there are so many lies now circulating about what women like myself do and think. But I have no problem with anyone who needs to live their life the way they do. And in fact, one of the women who was just I think late teens or about 20 girl when she joined one of my main writing groups at LAN for years was actually a transphobic young woman. She's now not transphobic, wrong word. The cancer was a serious body dysphoria, and she is now on Twitter. She is one of the has spoken up really, really strongly about what it's like to live with dysphoria and how hard it was for her to work her way through that, but she got there. And I'm delighted to say that she hadn't seen her in years, and she came along to the launch of Unbridled last week. So that was good. But I have huge sympathies for people who want to live out with what used to be seen as social norms, or just need to live a bit differently to be comfortable with themselves.
Yeah. Was it Manco Taboo, the one that you were thinking about? Manco Taboo?
That's it. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's not a very long poem, but it's a really good one. Yeah. Jean O'Brien.
Yes, that's it. Jean O'Brien, one of the Irish writers. But talking about the poets in the group, I see Arwen was in. I see Arwen has to go. She can't stay on, which is a shame. That's us coming up to 8 o'clock. So I think this would be a really good point to ask Catherine to read her poem from this dangerous anthology, Catherine, if that's okay with you. Catherine Robertson.
Yeah, of course. Crack the spine of my newly minted copy. So the poem I'm about to read is a mix of the personal and the political. As Maggie mentioned at the launch event on Saturday, there was a lot of rage about it. So this poem, there's a rage element which comes from years of strange men asking me to smile, being grabbed by the vagina in a public place by a stranger, being followed home by yet another male, being catcalled by yet more random men. So the tableau in the poem is inspired by my granny, who was very dear to me, and she died in 2008. So that's the personal element of the poem. The political element is that we as women face so much sexism, unwanted male attention, intrusion in both the public sphere and in private moments. And for me, in the 20th century, women speaking up about the issues that affect us directly, that should not cause consternation. So to my mind, if you're angry because women speak out, like, you are part of the problem. So that is the context to the poem. The poem is called Inherited Defiance. On the bus to Falkirk, I cradle Granny in the palm of my hand. An unadorned urn, not her taste at all. She liked colour and candour. A headscarf fluttering in buttercup yellow. A handbag rattling with lipsticks, buttery stumps in Revlon red. My own colours are muted as a man sits opposite me and leans forward. I hug the urn close to my chest. Smile, he says to me in the imperative case in the language of command. Smile. My smile is a switchblade passed in like the knowledge of blood through generations of women. Are you sure you want me to wield it? Instead, I picture him in an ash cloud, gagging on my granny. I'm sure she'd prove a final act of love, humour, and inherited defiance.
Thank you very much. That was fabulous, Catherine. Thank you. We're all clapping. It's just you can't hear us.
That's really great, Catherine. Thank you. And what did you say in the chat earlier that about the Sappho Prize?
Yeah, I've got a feminist lesbian friend who does quite well on the poetry front, and she's been going to submit things to the Sappho Prize, but accept poems from males now. So her view was that she wasn't going to give them the prize money, essentially, because you pay to submit your poem. She's like, well, I'm not contributing to be part of that, essentially. So, but yeah, I thought it was worth mentioning in the context of that poetry prize, the Sappho Prize of all prizes, accepts poems from men now. Just want to thank you for Jenny saying that she liked my poem, because her one, Jenny has a poem called The Schism Ring, that's in the book, and it was my favourite one from the anthology. It's a big-hearted poem, brimming with humour. Yeah, just really loved it.
Yeah, and especially because it starts with cake, Jenny. Obviously, a fantastic first line.
Yeah, you can see why Jenny's such a dangerous woman in Scottish poetry. Eh? She wants everyone to eat cake together, and it doesn't stop at cake. So I mean, editing this anthology was a total joy. It was, I just kept getting excited and ordering, for part of the editing job, getting the poems all in an order that works, was both a challenge and really I just kept thinking, oh, I need to sit that one next to that one, I need to put that on that side, and you're doing all this fiddling about, and I did not tire of reading and rereading these poems at all in all this time, and that is the feedback I'm getting from people as well, which is fabulous. We have Abigail Otley, who's in the book as well, and Abby is going to read for us, but I'm just giving her a few seconds of warning so that she can get organised there. The voices in the book are so different, and I think that's one of the wonderful things. It just shows that huge variety of women's voices. The fact that the ages go from 14 up to early 70s, and I think that every decade, in fact, I know that every decade is represented, was also important to me to try and do that. And the 14-year-old, for those who are wondering, if you're on social media, on Twitter, is the Irish young Irish girl Branduv, and she is quite amazing when she performs, and absolutely defiant, and it's great to see. I mean, they used to say to us a few years back, we would get all the time, oh, it's just the older generation, and I was thinking, well, no, because I've got daughters who are a full generation below me, obviously, and I know that that's not what they think. Of course, Jenny's ages with my daughters and others. And I used to say, well, I can speak up because of the age I am, because I'm not got a job to lose. I didn't, at that point, this was a bit before the cancellation became quite so clear and became quite a thing for writers. But I think it is really something which crosses generations and the way we come at it. But Abby, if you're ready now, would you like to read?
Yeah, I'm ready. Can you, is the sound okay?
Sounds fine.
Okay. Just a little bit of context. These 3 poems that I'm going to read straight off come from my unpublished pamphlet, Pink Kimono. And it's unpublished for all the reasons that Maggie's been talking about. This pamphlet actually has been shortlisted for publication or shortlisted in competitions for pamphlets now 9 times, but always the bridesmaid, never the bride. And I suspect that is because people are afraid of the content. The pamphlet tells the story, it carries a narrative of my experience of finding myself in the late 90s, early 20s, 200s, finding myself married to a severely autogynephile man, and not being able then to find anyone I could talk to about it. I was pretty much completely on my own with this. I did try and seek professional help from a counsellor who referred me to a psychologist stroke psychiatrist who told me that the problem was mine, that my inability to cope with it was problematic and not the condition. Okay, so these poems, although these events happened a long time ago, the poems have been brewing for most of that time. I started to write about this about 4 years ago. The poems, there's 38 of them now, and they're still coming. So I'll just start. Talking to my husband in the wardrobe. It's not mice or rats, nor a cat in the yard, not the sound of intruders downstairs. I know you are in there, telescoped shut, breathing in the ghost of my perfume. I see you burying your nose in the hot pink folds, my ball gown, shot silk and taffeta. I wonder why the flesh of your muscular thigh is enamored of my pearl-studded dress. What is the etiquette in cases such as this? The question is nothing if not delicate. Though I hear you most nights scuffling in my closet, I've stopped wondering now how you get in. Which of us was blinded? There might have been a snake, but there was no handy stick, no blind prophet of Apollo like Tiresias. That was another tale entirely. No drunken god with a bone to pick, spoiling for an after-party fight. Your trick, your metamorphosis, was simpler, more brutal. The blow you delivered sent me reeling. Afterward, you cried as if you were the victim, insisted I surely must have known. How could I have guessed what you kept so close, lulling me with your lattice work of lies? All the lesser betrayals I fancied I might find fell short of the truth by country miles. Turning the key I had stolen from your dresser, I came like a thief into your kingdom. Behold, your costumes hanging in racks and rows, your wig stands and your size 10 stilettos. There were photographs, a brilliant sea. For a time, I believed I might drown. Which of us was blinded? I think of it like this. You were the dark place. I brought my night scope. Finding you in my sights at last, my inner eye opened in a flash. And finally, she remembers her husband as Proteus. You slipped through my fingers like water, morphed into whatever you wanted to be, a tree, a wild pig, a howling wind. You knew all the angles, the smart street moves. You had aliases. It was no big deal, merely paper and ink. And you lied for fun. So I still don't know if your father was an embezzler. Even your dog had a bank account with Lloyd's.
Excellent. Thank you. That was great.
That was fabulous, Abby. And I mean, the quality of your poetry is wonderful, Abby, absolutely wonderful. And I am so grateful to you for allowing us to publish these 3 poems in Unbridled, because, as has been said already, these are voices which really do have problems getting heard. And can you imagine if Abby were to send these poems to some of the magazines that Jenny Lindsay referred to and I've been speaking about? Obviously, magazines have the right to publish what they want to publish, but what we're getting at the moment is a closing out of the other voices, and that's why doing the anthology of Unbridled is, from my point of view, so important. I don't want to close down anyone else's voice, but I want to make a space. Women need to make space for themselves. We're always having to make space for ourselves and take up space. And we need to keep doing that and just keep pushing on. And work like Abby's absolutely deserves a huge audience. So I'm just looking at the comments. Do you want to say them, Alison?
Well, yes, so Terry here is saying, thank you so much. It's wonderful to listen to the poets speaking their own words, even more so within this context. Thanks, Terry. And a lot of people expressing real appreciation for your speaking. Janet, yes, thank you so much. Linda Jackson had a question early on, or a remark to make. Linda, do you want to share with us about using the term women's poetry?
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, I think when I'm desperate to get hold of the book, and when you see that now, women's anthology, it's incredible that people will say, isn't it very brave of Maggie bringing out a book with a title with women's anthology in it, But I know that because we've got these 2 Wonderlust women books, and I've had people say things like, oh, you 3 women are a bit older, so you're those kind of 70s feminists. The rest of us have got wind of that. I mean, I think it's fabulous that Maggie has made that a generational issue, and made sure this book has generations in it, because I think that's quite commonplace, for people to say 70s and early 80s feminists will talk about women, the rest of us are a bit more wise. I've had that said to me at readings.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Linda, and I should say to everyone, Linda and I we're both in Glasgow. We do know each other, and we've both been known each other as poets, and Linda's a singer too for decades at this point. And I don't even get to do readings anymore, Linda, because even although there are people who would find that I, as a person, was not someone they would want to invite. There are a lot of other people who then are scared to invite me, because if they invite me, they might be accused of being as bad as me, whatever it is that I am supposed to have done, beyond being a lifelong supporter of poetry in Scotland, including poetry from people from all walks of life, but specifically seeing the need, as was recognised and identified by what is now Creative Scotland, Scottish Arts and everything else in the 90s, when we had Polygon was bringing out the original prints editions to start to get women's voices. Polygon's original print editions in the early 90s were one of the first places to publish people like Alison Kennedy and Janice Galloway and some of our major literary writers. It worked. It brought these women on, because sometimes we just need to have, as I'm going to come back to this, space and place again. We need to have a space that is for women, because there will always be men out there who say, we don't want to hear that. We're not interested in that. And I also at one point was really keen not to say women's poetry, because there's a risk of that becoming a ghetto itself. But with this, and I actually thought about everything in this book has been thought about. I thought about when I designed the cover, and when I was putting Unbridled on, and I thought, I have to let people know Unbridled is not got enough in it. And it had to be women's poetry, because it's women who are bridled. No one else is getting bridled here. It's women who are getting bridled. And it's just it's just a new version of the Scold's Bridle, which interestingly enough, the first recorded use of a Scold's Bridle was in Scotland, in Lanark, not far from here, in I think it was 1653 at the Sheriff Court. It was recorded as a punishment for women who spoke too much. So putting women's poetry in it both risks ghettoising it, but also says, no, we're here. And we are not, I mean, people have been asking me if there'll be a second anthology.
Definitely.
Yeah, so I think that the number of people, because obviously the reach on the first one too, much as the stuff is absolutely fabulous, there are a lot of people that think, oh, I would have liked the opportunity to have, to have at least sent something in for consideration. So we'll need to think about that. But I'm glad you've told us that this is happening. This is being said to people. I had the poem read. I think there is enough information to say it was about me. It was read out by a trans woman at an event in Edinburgh a few weeks ago, and other people told me about it. Because the poem was dedicated to a prominent Scottish woman poet who is transphobic, and that had to be either Jenny or me, obviously. We're the two that get these names. And the thing is, it was me, because it's not the first type of insult like that I've had. But the thing is, no one challenged it in the event. No one challenged it. Sunday afternoon poetry reading event. And yet even to have someone like me reading at your event would be seen as being too challenging for those who don't want to hear me read my vagina poem.
I think it's really great that you made the point, Maggie. You're supporting anyone who wants to write what they want to write. But this is the biggest challenge to feminism that I have ever seen. I was part of women's studies in Strathclyde for 7 years, and it's not recently. It was in the early 90s. They cancelled that class. It was a very successful running class at the Uni of Strathclyde, and they cancelled it because of legislation, it had to become gender studies. So what we had then was not enough people. So that because there wasn't enough men coming on, and they wanted an equitable group. So that whole thing get cancelled, and that was a way back then, so it couldn't be called women's studies anymore. And now we're not meant to say the word women. It's, as you have said very clearly, you don't want to shut up anyone, but you want the place If I want to call myself a woman and speak as a woman at women's issues, that's it. I'm not silencing anyone else, but it's outrageous.
Yep.
I
have never, another woman like me, we have never tried to in Scotland, which of course, you know, in particular Edinburgh has been the epicenter of a lot of this in the UK. And we have never tried to close down anyone else's events or poetry events or anything else. Because, I mean, I wouldn't do it. I mean, I have no desire. I actually, if there are people out there who are trans and they want to write poetry, then they need to, they have every right. And I'm fine. Absolutely fine. We need all human experience explored in all of our art forms. But you can't say, in order to allow some people to do that, we have to close other people. In this case, we're talking about women, which is 50% or 50% plus of the population. They have to be quiet. And it is so much of it isn't. It's just actually old-fashioned misogyny. They found a new way of trying to put us back in our place. We were making too much progress and they're trying to put us back. And the only way we can do it is by keeping fighting back against it. And saying, I'm happy to run a workshop that is all, or I mean, I particularly at the moment want to run workshops that are all women. And I say that because they're the ones I'm challenged on. But I would be very happy to run a workshop that is male, female, and anyone who sees themselves as trans man, trans woman. That is not, I want these people all to find their voices and find their voices in ways which gets what they're saying across to the best, you know, to achieve their art form in the best way that they can. That's my whole adult life, you know, or post-children life, sort of from my early 30s, has been about is enabling people to express themselves. So sorry, I'm getting rather passionate here. I'd better calm down. So yeah. So thanks for telling us of your experience, Linda. But it shows you the extent of the problem that we're up against.
We've got a comment from Margaret Litchfield. Margaret, would you care to make your point about being silenced?
Oh, yes. I was, until the weekend, a member of the WI. I have now resigned completely and utterly. I want no more part of it. I am so tired at age 76 of being criticised, of being told I'm homophobic. I have not homophobic, transphobic. I'm not anything of the sort. I am gender critical, I will admit to that. But I have 2 lesbian daughters and a daughter-in-law, and they have, through them, I know a trans person. But what I'm trying to say is the WI have silenced my voice because they will not accept my gender critical views. They will only allow, if you are transcendered, you can say what you like. But if you're gender critical like me, you're told to take your post down, shut up, go away, anything. But don't speak out. And that to me is not what it should be about.
Yeah, I think I completely appreciate where you're coming from, because of course this is what happened a few years ago to me in this online group, the Women in the Arts in Scotland. I mean, if I'm not a woman in the arts in Scotland, who is? I mean, it's just so daft. But it's very, very hurtful to us, and it's very confusing for us at first, because we're thinking, but you're asking me, it's like, well, of course, since the Maya Forstater case is so much better, because we now can say, actually, I have a protected belief. Prior to that was when I was having the most problem, because we weren't able to say, well, actually, I've protected, but I mean, I've been accused of being homophobic as well. And I was delighted to hear you say that. I too have a lesbian daughter. I have a happily married lesbian daughter. So I too have a lesbian daughter-in-law. And my lesbian daughter, when she came out as lesbian, was totally embraced by all of my family, because that's how we are. That's how we are. There was no trauma for her. Just agree with that. And it's people like us who are actually very open-minded, and because we're open-minded and because we have feminist views, that is that women do have rights, and those rights should be inalienable, and other people should also have full human rights. But women, because of our physical size and all the other reasons, pregnancy, menstruation, everything that comes with that. We have, I mean, you're 76, and that makes me think, one of the things that struck me in this time and again, and for those of you who are over a certain age here, I was a second-class citizen in my country as a young woman, and I didn't even fully appreciate that at the time. But my God, this has made me appreciate it. When we hear about full human rights, when I got married at 20, I was a minimum wage earner. I was a teacher. My husband was still a law student. I could not, we got the flat that we were going to be staying with came with my teaching post, and it was a local corporation flat. I was not allowed to sign the lease papers. Now, that's second-class citizenship. Rape in marriage was still legal, and I'm pleased to say it was my ex-husband now. It was my ex-husband's law firm that dealt with that case and took that case in Scotland. There were so many things where I was not on an equal footing. And if I go back to school, it's even worse, because the kids were streamed according to ability, and the top 30, 36 or whatever boys were put in the A class, and the top 36 girls were put in the B class. We got that message very, very early. We were furious, so we wrote AB on all our books, 1AB, 2AB, 3AB. But just think about that. So I have been a second-class citizen in the UK, and I'm not taking any nonsense about it being to do with my age now or anything else, because it really seriously isn't. Sorry, I'm getting passionate.
No, that's fine. You should be passionate. Linda Crampson has got a comment to make about ending sexism in school. I think now's just the moment to say it. Sue, I beg your pardon, Sue Crampton. Are you with us, Sue? Okay, well, I'll make it for you. Maybe you can't unmute yourself. It says, this is so true. I'm in the End Sexism in Schools nationwide campaign group. We're campaigning to change the sexist choices in schools and in curriculums. I already investigated Key Stage 3 English. We're about to launch a history research too. I have a passion for making visible invisible women who've been written out of history. This misogynistic attack by extreme trans activists is just another way of muzzling us. Thanks, Sue.
Yes, very, very, very much agree with that. And one of the worrying things is that so much of this is going in through schools now. And I say this is the mother of a lesbian daughter, and seriously, you know, I had a poem years ago, and it's in Wild Women of a Certain Age, about sex education. And as a teacher, my impression of sex education, and I taught sex education to boys, to teen boys who were excluded from mainstream school. So my impression generally was, though, that the kids aren't really wanting to know all this, you know? Just let them go on with it. To be honest, I never had any hang-ups about sex. I never had any problems working out what to do or anything else. And I don't actually understand why it's all got to be so explicit, but and I'm the woman that writes the filthy poems. So yeah, I think it's very worrying that our children are being introduced to ideas of sex, but that's another subject quite so early. Are there any more questions you want to put to me at the moment, Alison? Or
well, I was thinking, you told us about this man who didn't like to hear about women talking about their experiences, and yet there's a whole genre of poetry about war poetry. Obviously, for the Great War in particular, and the Second World War, and yet it's not as if we women are saying, "Oh no, don't publish that."
Well, I think first of all, war poetry is
their life experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're just coming to the thing. I mean, the war poetry absolutely should exist, and I don't have an issue with that. But what I have an issue with is there were, and I think anthologies have possibly been done just recently, there were women obviously also writing about their experiences, and that tends to be, wasn't the type of poems we're looking for. I mean, seriously, if you look at the figures for how women and men were published pre-1990, it's really shocking. I mean, it's absolutely shocking. So I have written a poem, if anyone wants to go to my blog spot, but it's terrible to navigate, my magigibson.blogspot.com. I have written a fair bit about how women haven't been published, but you have to go back the years. You can't tell where stuff is. I'll try and sort it out. But the thing is with women's experiences, as women's experience, I mean, war is both, but women's experiences as women's experiences are very, very different. I mean, when we look at for male violence in women, for example, we'll see that I see different figures slightly, but it's something like 98% of violence. I'm going to get these figures wrong, so I'm going to get them wrong. But the perpetrators of violence are something like 98% male, and the victims of violence are, I think it's about 80%. Don't quote me on either of these figures, but that's roughly it. And therefore, we are seeing the world a bit differently, because we are, as Catherine mentioned about what she had to put up with just as a younger woman. I used to get smile hen, and we're meeting the world differently, and in terms of violence. And I thought that might like to read this poem, which you see so many of the poems in here. I don't think any of the poems in this anthology could have been written by men, because you have to. Poetry is something deep. It doesn't mean that no man could write a novel or a poem about women, which was lovely. But these poems are very much women writing from lived experience. I don't like the phrase, I shouldn't have said it. Women are writing from their own experience. This poem of mine is called, which is one of my hard-hitting poems, so I'll warn you now. And it's called Dead Woman Counts. She counts dead women, not women wiped out in war zones by bullets and bombs, nor the 63 million missing in India. Rita Banjeri is keeping count of them. No, nor is she counting the Korean comfort women, piecing together what's left of their bones in the fire pits where they perished. No, she keeps count closer to home. Not just the victims of those wild-eyed strangers they drilled us to evade. Stay with your pals when you leave the pub. Don't walk down darkened lanes. Don't take shortcuts through woods alone. Don't get into vans. Don't wear too short skirts, too high heels, low-cut tops. Don't end up a headline, a corpse, a break a mother's heart statistic in a ditch. No, not just those. She is counting women killed with knives, shotguns, ropes, with septic tanks and fists, with poison, cricket bats and fire, each killed by a man who said he loved her once, a boyfriend, husband, partner, ex. a man she trusted in her home, a man who thought her life no longer counts. But she is counting every week, every one, and we are counting with her.
Excellent.
Mm.
That is really excellent. Thank you. I was hoping you'd read that one out.
And I think it's that thing that we live differently, because we have to be aware of our safety. And of course, what we saw at the weekend was just how a woman within war become, I can't even express, I don't want to express any more about that. But we also are at risk in our homes. There are more murders of women in the home and by people they know than any others. So that's what I'm saying. It's not, I don't consciously think I'm going to write about women or I'm writing as a woman. I don't consciously do that. This is my life experience. This is my body. This is the body that has had the double mastectomy, that's given birth 3 times, that's miscarried once, that has had hemorrhage after a coil was put in wrongly in public, that has had cervical cauterization, that breastfed my children before at 36 I had the mastectomy. This is what my experience is. And so when I write as a woman, I am not going to have someone say, is somebody really going to say to me, you can't, you mustn't read a poem about any of those experiences. I mean, that is back to where we were in the 1950s. You can't talk about these things, keep quiet, don't say anything. So I'm delighted that Unbridled says all the things. But would you like me to read a more uplifting poem?
Fire away.
Or will I have to hold on to it? Right, this one isn't in the book. It's from Wild Women of a Certain Age. And it's the poem that got me into all this trouble in a way, because I wrote this at probably just the very end of the 90s when we were making headway, and it seemed a really good idea. And I was managing to overcome all my own internal censors and internal taboos and all the rest of it. And the title came from I was in a pub with another woman in the west of Ireland. I just met her and we got on great and we were having a drink. And a very handsome young man walked by and looked over at us and said, "There's a couple of wild women." And I said, "Wild women of a certain age." And I challenged this woman. I said, "You write a poem and I'll write a poem." But in the end, it was only me that wrote the poem. Wild women of a certain age. My sisters, the time has come to let your hair grow long and wild and grey, to cast away the heated rollers and the tongs. So when the moon is 9 months full, let us meet out on our lawns, let us burn our diet sheets, let us pound our bathroom scales to heaps of rusting springs. Let us shred our measuring tapes, our firmer buttocks videos, let us burn an effigy of Cher. Let us dip our eye creams down the pan, let us revel in our pink plump ripeness. Let us wear our stretch marks like shining honours. Let us celebrate ourselves because we can. For we have bodies that have loved. We have bodies that have lived. Mouths that have savoured cheese and meat and dribbled over chocolate and fruit. Tongues that have tasted good and evil, lips that have sipped fine wines, fingers that have stroked. We have been the carriers of babes. Our bellies have swollen with drumlin curves. Our breasts have hung like ripened fruit. Our teeth have bitten skin and threads. We have swallowed bitter pills. We have known dark bloodstains on our hands. We have been the carriers of laughter and of pain, the healers of our children's ills. We have lain below the stars. We have lain below our men. Yes, sisters, now the time has come to claim our bodies for ourselves, for in our silver hair, our well-filled thighs, in those laughter lines that crowd our eyes, we live, we are alive.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you so much. I really love that poem. And I don't know how you managed to restrain yourself from putting that into Unbridled.
I know, I thought about it, but there were so many celebratory poems in there, and that's, I mean, to be honest, the poem has had, it's been, it's had quite a lot of coverage already, been on Radio 4 for International Women's Day. So it's been out. It's now available, I have to say, in a poster, which I will have for a sale at Filia, but it's also on sale through my website, I think. Well, maybe I don't have it there yet. I need to sort out my website and my blog spot. Been so busy on Unbridled, little else has got done. So,
and I think your Dead Women Count, that's a reference to Karen Ingala Smith, isn't it? Counting Dead Women.
It is both a reference to her and to, oh gosh, her name's just gone out of my head. Jean Hatchett, isn't it? Who does
Jean,
the
that's right.
riding the bikes, and I kind of got a wee bit because it's actually about the domestic violence. But of course, Karen Inglis Smith was the person in the UK who set up the Dead Women, Counting Dead Women, I think they call it. And I turned that around to give a slightly, both that meaning and another meaning as well to it. And I'm such a huge admirer of what Karen has done and what Sue did with all her bike rides as well. Absolutely. Each one for a woman murdered by a husband or partner.
Well, I hope you're going to take plenty of copies of that on a poster with you to Filia next week. I shall be there.
Will. Oh, will you? Okay, it's great.
Yeah. And I'm going to bring my copy and see if I can get as many of you poets to sign it for me.
Oh, that's a great idea.
That's my next challenge.
And do encourage people, because I think my merch table, I don't quite understand the layout plan for it. And I'm scared that my merch table is way at the back of Beyond and nobody will find me. And I have some of the posters of Unbridled as well, just a few of them. But and my vagina poem. Although it was only after I put my vagina poem up in a frame in my own house that my grandchildren came in and suddenly somebody said, oh, you better take that down. It's not because of the vagina bit, because they say that, but there's a swear word which means the same as vagina, particularly if you're from Glasgow at the end of it. I mean, I'm not sure if you would want me to read a poem with a swear word in it, even if it's in a.
This is an adult's inclusive space here.
Well, I think it's in this book here. So if you want one more poem, again, it's.
Is that the 16 Poets book?
No, it's in this Washing Hugh McDermott's Socks. Washing Hugh McDermott's Socks, which is out of print now. Came out in 2017. It went to several print runs, and now my publisher has allowed it. So if you want this poem, which was everybody's favourite in it, if you want it, you need to buy the poster. But this won't be to everybody's taste. But I had fun, and it was something that I mean, to be honest, and again, this would be in 2014, and this was. I found this really quite shocking. It was someone was going to be reading a poem by someone else who wasn't there, and I knew the other woman, and I knew she wanted to be upfront about it. So it's back, I'm afraid, not Volva this time, but the title of this poem is actually V********* A, and it isn't Viagra. Okay, it's because before she reads, the poet apologizes. The next poem has, whisper it softly, a vagina in it. And I'm wondering why the utterance of that softly vibrating up front, opening to an eager before that juicily squelching central on its heels, that cry of dropping to a moaning and then the grand finale, the climactic, the lip-parted gasp of would offend. Get a grip, I want to shout. This is the second millennium. We are a poetry audience who must have met the odd vagina before, celebrated in succulent syllables and velvet vowels, opening and closing like sea anemones, eulogized in metaphors of orchids, rosebuds, bearded clams, buzzing bees, serenaded as quivering quims, fuzzy fuds, giddy gardens of divine delight. Why? Some of us even have our very own, discreetly tucked away between our thighs. Yes, right here with us in this hall tonight. So here's some advice for all female poets. When you're about to read a poem with a vagina in it, don't be a cunt. Never apologize. And the reason I decided to read that is because it ends on never apologize. And I am not going to apologize for being a woman and being writing as a woman. And I am not going to limit myself. And I want to make space for other women to not limit themselves as well. Wow.
That's splendid. Thank you so much. That's really great. Has anybody got any more questions to ask before we come towards the close? Let's just have a look. Several people want to buy it in poster form.
If they just email us through my website, then my website is Magi Gibson, Magi.
I've put that in the chat.
That's great.
And Woman Word Bookshop as well. That you can get it. Yeah. And never apologise, never complain, never explain. I think that's another thing. Thanks, Ulrika. That's a good point and bloody brilliant. In lots of different meanings, I think, perhaps, Janet Crawford. This is the thing about this anthology. It's so writerly. There's so many allusions to classics, to other poems. There's one about the plums. Somebody's eating the plums. It just reminds you of William Carlos Williams' poem about this is the... I've eaten the plums which you left in the fridge. You know?
Oh, that's not in that anthology. That's from another book.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, but there's so many others like that. You know, there's a really great one about how to kill Jules Denby, I think, how to kill women, which reminds me of.
Oh yes, that's powerful. Powerful one from Jules. Oh yes, 3. Oh, I want to say this. There's other women in here who have been
in the mouth.
cancelled, and Jules Denby has been very, very outspoken. Originally a punk poet way back before I was, or just when I was starting to write too, and I was so delighted that Jules has got poems in here. And Jules is very outspoken, and what's her name? Billy Bragg had a go at her not that long ago because she knew him in that world at that time. And the other people that have been, some people have put their heads above the parapet, as it were. What a way that we have to speak, eh? And we're back to war language again. They, for the first time in here, but other people like Jules Denby being one. Yes, Louise de Strasse, who's another woman who is a singer mostly, but who sent a poem for this. Louise de Strasse has had a terrible time with Billy Bragg attacking her in particular in the last few weeks. And Sonia Douglas from Cardiff, whom I mentioned before, Sonia got cancelled in Wales. She invited a couple of years ago now, a few years ago, she was invited onto an arts podcast as a poet, and then she was uninvited because they heard that she had made transphobic comments, of which, of course, she hadn't. She'd made gender critical comments on, and was just dropped in that. It makes it very, very difficult for people like myself, Jenny, Sonia, Louise de Strass, the others. So there's a fair number of women here who actually, there were attempts to silence. Rachel Rooney, of course, being another. Rachel Rooney is in here as well. And I'm so grateful to all these women for contributing. And the one thing when I was putting this together, I realized was no one woman, because normally, you know, I get asked to provide poems for anthologies quite a lot. And I usually have, I never have to think, oh, I wonder if there'll be any in this anthology, which I might feel reflects on me in a way which I wouldn't want it to. I'd like to thank all the women in this anthology for trusting me that I would put together an anthology where there wasn't anything that could, that they would not be proud to stand with. And I was aware of that as an editor, that was part of my responsibility. But again, I say, I have never had any desire, intention to insult or be cruel to anyone in my entire life. And therefore that's my background. That's where I'm coming from. I would also like to point out that there are two other poems from poets that I am very, very grateful for, and that is there are two women who provided poems about the experience of your daughter wanting to transition and the impact on the family and you as a mother. And these are all the stories which we know would not get published. The poems, rather, wouldn't be printed elsewhere. So I'm most of all just grateful to all the women, to all the women.
She was loved, I think.
Oh yes, the poem. It breaks my heart, and I say I have a gender non-conforming daughter. I have two daughters. One is gender non-conforming, and kind of always has been, and I always embrace that. And the other one is not. It's gender. Oh God, I'm getting that. Yeah, one is gender non-conforming. The other one is gender conforming. And my gender non-conforming daughter does quite often get mistaken as a young man, and it doesn't bother her in the slightest. She just deals with it.
Yes.
But the poem that the one about the daughter that is the really gut-wrenching one for me, it's called She, and it's by an American woman, and she didn't want her
yes, Rainy G.
Rainy G. And it works on a repetition. I don't want to read any of it because you need to read the whole thing, but it's an extremely powerful piece of writing. And the fact that it's delivered in quite such a simple way, I think is perfect for a topic where there is obviously so much emotion at the back of it.
It is one of the longer poems in your book, in the book.
It is. Yeah.
And it's really well written, like all of them. There's not one that I would think you could be without, to be honest. And I wait for the next anthology of women's writing, Maggie, and I can't wait for it to come out. So thank you so much.
You're setting me up to do more here. The anthology,
yeah.
I think it's very, very hard. It's been a lot of hard work. It's still hard work because obviously I'll be pushing it at Philia. I want it to go as far as it can. It's been run like a small industry out of my one-bedroom flat. So we've got boxes all over the place, all the stuff for Philia. And I just think it had to be done. And I think that's what we do as women. We see something that has to be done. We step up and we find a way to do it. And thanks to all the the people who supported me, and in particular Jenny Lindsay and Liz Houchin in Dublin, and Estelle Birdie from Dublin as well. And it just has been, it's been a lovely experience. There's nothing nasty happened so far. I hope it stays that way, because I don't really see why there should be. And Jenny is just reminding us there. Jenny, myself, and a playwright called Annie George, who usually does, no, she does perform as well, but she's written a piece specifically for it. So that's Jenny Lindsay, Magi Gibson, Annie George, and possibly Sonia Douglas as well. On Saturday evening at Filia, we will be performing at 7 p.m. in Arch 3 before the big party. So, so hopefully, and any of you that are coming to Filia, do come and say hello to me, and Jenny will be helping me out on the merch table. And Catherine, actually, Catherine's helping on the merch table as well.
That's great.
We've not worked out how we're doing it yet, but
it's going to be such a party. And Abigail says also, can we mention Vaishnavi Sundar, who's also going to be there at Filia too. She's crowdfunding to finish off making her film Beyond the Looking Glass, Lime Soda Films. So, anybody wants to go and help her, go to Vaishax, at Vaishax on Twitter, X, whatever it is now. But she'll be present at Filia. Look, you're going to be presenting and exhibiting at this massive conference. It's the biggest one in Europe, in Glasgow, this coming weekend. Can't wait to be there. We've got all more things packed, ready to take. Thank you so much for all of you, for your great questions, your superb comments, everybody. We will next meet on Monday, the 20th of November, not the 2nd, but the 3rd Monday this time, when our speakers will be Louise Somerville and Emma Barraclough from Bad Policy Watch. Do look out for the announcement or sign up to our website, liberalvoicewomen.org, and we'll send you the message, the invitation, as soon as it comes out. They're going to be talking about the impact of inclusive motions that are being agreed up and down the country at councils. So it's an important policy issue. We also want to hear from you with any other policy-related issues or problems that you want us to raise. We launched our booklet, Liberals and Women's Rights, at our off-fringe event during the Lib Dem Federal Conference in Bournemouth, chaired by Dame Jenny Murray, featuring Vaishnavi, as well as Raquel Rosario Sanchez and Dr. Laura Favaro. If you'd like a copy, email us and let us know. We're also going to be at the Filia Women's Conference this coming weekend, and also at the LGB Alliance Conference, which is going to be in London on the 27th of October. We'll be at both of these events, and we'll have copies of our booklet available. Thank you to Rachel, our technical staff, and the organizer of our Eventbrite Zoom meetings. Thanks to all of you for being part of a really great event. And most of all, to our speakers tonight, the Unbridled, Magi Gibson, Catherine Robertson, Abigail Otley. Thank you so much, everybody. And I hope to see you next month. Thanks, Maggie.
Thank you, Alison, for inviting me.